All right. Hello, everybody. Happy spring. I'm so excited to be joining you all for our next art journal. And hopefully you've cracked your box open and gotten into your supplies. But if you haven't, no worries. We're going to play with a lot of these supplies today and give them all a good workout so that you feel really comfortable using them throughout the quarter of this box. So couple things that we're going to do that we do every time, which is one material 3 ways. So we'll do that one. We'll do the prompt that comes in your little menu every time. And then we'll experiment with these materials in different ways. So, there's kind of the standard way to use a material, and then there's the Erin way. And I'm hoping that you all are enjoying that we generally try to use material off-label. And what I'm really encouraging you with doing this is to get creative and break some of the rules and try new things, because that's really going to enable you to use these materials to express yourself in the greatest way possible in your art journal. So with that said, let's go to the desktop view. And I've got my new art journals here, and I'm going to go ahead and write on here on the back side that this is spring 2024. So you, of course, can choose to date yours however you like. With my personal art journals, I generally date them in the inside front cover and inside back cover, but with the ones that are for ArtJournalSnacks, I like to have them dated for the quarter that they represent. So this month's prompt, you may have noticed, is really about before, during, and after making art. So I wanted to do this before we do anything else, because as an art therapist and also an art space researcher, I'm very interested in making sure that we have accurate data, right? Accurate art space data. So that means we need to get our pre-measure before we've made any art. So I'm going to set this aside. Side note, how fabulous is this with the feather background? We're really excited about that. All right, so we've got our little bonus prompt here. And this one says, complete the faces representing before you make art, while you're making art, and after you make art. And of course, you can do this in any number of ways, but I thought it would be a fun way to start today. And if you don't particularly like the representation here, you can draw this out yourself. I'd encourage you to think about this every time you sit down to journal. Like, how am I feeling right now? Pause for a moment in the middle of whatever it is that you're making, and then reflect on how you're feeling afterwards. So I'm going to use, I ended up with this color Copic marker, Smoky Blue, which is probably a color I would have picked because I really like the color that this is. And I'm going to go ahead and say, before making art, I'm trying to think about how you represent like a curious face. Very often before I sit down to do any art making, I feel curious. And you could decide that maybe you want to even write the word to represent it, or you might just leave it as it is, but I'm going to go ahead and write. There's our before. And this journal might look like it's totally blank right now, but I did do a couple of things in here just so it wouldn't be totally blank when we were playing in it today. So we'll come back to this later. But let's go to this. I'm going to skip a page. I think I'm going to get kind of messy in this. I'm going to move some of these other things out of the way. And I have some little numbers here. Some of you may remember that I teased these on ephemera hour. These, I found these in the building that I work in. I think they're left over from the electrician. And I found this little packet of numbers, and I've been having so much fun playing with them. So, all right. So the material that we're going to use 3 different ways is kind of our feature material, and one of the foci of this box is this idea of translucency and transparency. So we have these blender crayons, which many of you know I do a lot of resist in my work and play with that idea a lot. But these are so cool because they're totally transparent, which is different than, I have one right here, which is different than like a white crayon, right? Because if I use a white crayon over text or over something else, there's going to be this like fog of white that goes over the top of it. So it is still like on the white page of the paper, that's fine, but there's something different about using this totally translucent thing, okay? So what can we do with that? So the first thing we can do is just scribble. And you'll notice when you use this that it has like a very, how do I want to describe this? It's almost like it's grabbing onto the paper a little bit more, right? It's a different feeling than a regular crayon. So I'm gonna let that be right there. So that's one, is to just scribble. The second one would be to write something. And when you're writing with something that you can't see on the paper, you really have to think about it as you're doing it, because you don't get that hint or that clue from your eyes to tell you, oh yeah, I wrote that right, or I spelled that correctly. So I'm gonna write something and it'll get revealed later. It's like magic tricks. With that. And then the third thing we can do is to use some kind of ephemera. So I'm going to pull something out from in here. This is kind of a fun idea. So this is the little book label, and some of you may have in your ephemera pack. I was gifted some used. I'm flipping this over because I almost like that one more, the back side. So I'm going to make a choice here and glue mine down with the back side on. So the third way that you can use this is to kind of make sure that your text stays no matter what you're putting over the top, right? I don't care about that. So I want that part to disappear. So maybe I want my line to still show up. And maybe I also want some text on here. So you can use this to make sure that like very fine text, because this is a very fine pen, these fine liners that we received in this box. This is the 003, and so it could disappear. If I go over this with ink or watercolor, that very fine black line can very easily disappear. So I can use this to make sure that it stays put. And you might also notice that as you use this, unlike a wax crayon, quite a bit more of it gets used. That's why you get 3 of these. And so it does almost operate a little bit like a way to blend the white of the paper, or the surface level of the paper, into the surface level of the ephemera. So now I'm kind of scrubbing back against this. And you can see it's kind of filling in the crack there. So it's almost like a no heat way to do encaustic, which for any of you who are familiar with that art form, it's using hot melted wax with pigment in it, and it's really beautiful. but it is also not the safest thing, not just because of the heat, but also because of the fumes. But it's a really beautiful media. And this is a way to get a little taste of that idea and that aesthetic without the heat, without the pigment in the air going into your lungs, without the need for lots of ventilation. I'll also add this is parrot safe. So this is a way to use wax that is safe in my life and probably in many of yours as well. Okay. No shade to encaustic work because I do really love it. All right, so now we have all these media on here. And the first thing we can do is to use the Lyra Aqua Brush markers that we got. So I'm going to start with the red. And remember that in number 1, I just scribbled. So just using the marker as it is, you can see it's starting to reveal where my scribble is. I'm going to use another color. So the thing that I really, really love about these markers, and you can see it happening right here, is how beautifully and seamlessly they blend, which is not, for a water-based marker, it's not the norm, right? Like normally you would see those, more of the line where the two colors meet together. And if you're just using it straight from the marker, no other blending tools, it's hard to get a really nice gradation. And we can get that with these, which is just really beautiful. Okay. So now that I have a little bit of that on there, I'm going to take brush. And the nice thing about this wax, again, because it's a little bit more wax medium going onto the surface of the paper, it holds more pigment on the surface. So you can actually blend that away and find where the rest of the exposed paper is. My big scribble here. And so someone who hasn't watched this happen might look at this and think this was watercolor. Again, that's just one of the things I really, really love about these Lyra markers is they feel like so many different materials in one, right? You've got the fine point, you've got the brush end, and you can use it just like a marker. But then as soon as you touch this with some water, it no longer looks like marker at all. Right? So that's pretty exciting. Okay. So down below there, we have the place where I wrote. And with that one, I'm actually going to take a little bit of ink. I'm just going to squeeze a little bit of ink into this jar lid. You can see it's received some other ink in the past. And we'll see how I did with spelling my word here and writing my letters. So it's a fun way to leave yourself a secret message. Sometimes when you're journaling, you'll have a feeling or an emotion and you're maybe not ready to show it, but you can write it with these transparent markers or transparent crayons and then come back later when you're ready to look at it, right? So this might be, you're maybe somewhere out in public and you're feeling something and you're not sure what to do with it. You can write it down and then later when it feels more comfortable or safe, you can come back to that. But of course, this word is a word that I always invite into my life, curiosity. So curious is just fine to show up anytime. All right, so that's really fun the way those things are showing up. And we shift this a little bit. So with this one, I'm going to go back to the Lyra markers a little bit here. I'm going to go to the black one because I want to show you how. So I've got this black. And you can see how it will obscure the lines on this library card. Check out. but not the things I've written. And it won't obscure the lines where I've put the wax. Using that to get some pigment down onto the paper, and then I can blend it around with my brush. So if you go lightly with a brush over the top, like you don't scrub your brush on it, you can keep some of your lines that you've done with the marker, which is kind of nice, and then you can let it settle into other areas. Like I do want, I don't need to preserve the brand name for these little library cards, so I can go ahead and obscure that. I don't know if you all can hear Sammy, but she's singing me some background music. The door is closed to the room she's in, but she's trying her hardest to be part of this as well. And some of you should let us know in the chat if you are one of the lucky people that received one of Sammy's feathers or one of Griffin's feathers. They were molting when I was putting the ephemera envelopes together, so I put some into the envelopes as they were coming off. And if you didn't get one this time, don't worry, they're always shedding feathers, so there may be more in the future. All right. So another just thing to notice is that you might get kind of these puddles of pigment sitting on top of the wax if you put it on thick, and you can wipe that away either now or later. Come back to it. You can see over here like how thick this wax is. So again, just very, very different from a regular wax crayon. So that's 3 different ways to use the wax crayons we got. I'm going to put a piece of wax paper here, more wax, the wax theme live stream. I'm going to switch to this next piece because I want to show the difference. And I'll show it to you using the wax crayon we received, a white crayon, and kind of a flesh tone wax stick. Okay, this is kind of a different version of the 3 ways thing. So here's this wax. And here's a white crayon. So you can even see when I'm using it, the difference in the quality. This is just a lot more wax that's going on to the surface. Feels a little sticky. Look at the versions of how these form a resist. You can see up here, this almost looks like the artist crayon wax was painted on rather than being drawn on. So it does give you that ability to just get a lot more coverage on the page. So why does that matter in your art journal? Why that matters is if you're trying to kind of build up a surface, right? Maybe you've got a collage image on there, if you've got some writing that you did and you want to cover your writing, these wax artist crayons are gonna do that for you in a different way. It's also because it's a little bit of a wider tip, it's going to be a lot faster and easier to cover something. I just want to show one more thing with this, which is how these play with watercolor. A little bit of watercolor. And you can see, right, these markers look just like you're painting with watercolors, but just a lot more portable, right? So you can take these Lyra brush pens and then a water brush, and hit the road or the desk or the car, and we've got someone art journaling from their car. And you don't need to pack all those watercolors with you all the time. Although, of course, you all know that I generally have all the materials all the time, all the different places. I've got a good stash at my desk. Got a stash at my desk here. I've got a stash back in the studio. Some in all of my backpacks. So I'm going to let that dry. And I've got the advantage of some sun here so that I can let that dry a little faster, hopefully. So I'm going to come back over it again with the artist crayon. Okay. So I wanted to show another way that you might use resist. So this is just, I started with just putting this hatch pattern, right? This kind of woven pattern onto this page. And then went back afterwards with watercolor, and then went back with this swatch color thing that came in a set that I got. And then went back again and just kind of added a little bit more content. So you can see how this resist technique can be used to create a pattern. A lot of times we think of it kind of for one use only, maybe to preserve the white of the page, or you know, something more designy. And this enables you to do something that creates an interesting pattern. Okay. So what do you do when you get to the end? You just peel a little bit of that wrapper off. Okay. You might peel the whole wrapper off all at once. That's totally fine. It's pretty strong. That's the other thing to notice. You may have noticed that the crayon I brought over was snapped apart, and that generally happens to me because I push really hard. I was pushing really hard with this, and it's holding its own pretty well. Okay, I wanted to show you this page because this is something I did with some of my students, and the challenge was in 3 minutes to draw as many faces as you could. So we had the prompt for using that face technique, filling in that face, finishing the face as an assessment, a self-assessment, but this is another way that you could play with that idea to just fill a page with faces. And then I asked my students to pick one that was them, one that was a friend, one that made them feel fearful, or that might be a foe, and then one that made them feel curious. So I didn't end up putting the numbers on mine. I haven't had a chance to reflect on it yet, but it's a fun thing, fun idea to play with. Okay. So I wanted to play on this page, and this is another ArtJournalSnacks journal. So same paper that you all are using. This is just another one that I've been playing with. And this one already has one form of resist on it. So these are newspaper text transfers, and I've got a little bit of fiber here. There's a little bit of watercolor over the top. And I wanted to then come in with this wax to just kind of show that there are a lot of ways to combine this with other materials. Again, this idea that many of you've heard me talk about quite a bit, this idea of taking away that hard edge of where one thing meets another. So where the tape meets the paper has already formed one form of resist. And now with putting this totally transparent wax over the top, I can do this again, right? I can use this resist technique again to lose the edge of the tape and to just kind of integrate what I've already added to this paper into it. Just a little bit more wax on the page, and why don't I? Okay, so I'm going to use, I checked because the Copic marker will bleed through a little bit, which we've been talking about on mix. I never mind when pigment bleeds through from one page to the other. It mostly enhances the other pages. I like that challenge of that. But if that is a problem for you, you know, check before you use something like alcohol ink or something really dark and thick. You can see now how the alcohol ink sits on top of the wax. kind of an interesting way. It exposes a little bit of the texture of it. And I'm brushing away now with the Copic marker, both to kind of clean off the wax off the end of it, as well as to kind of fade it into the rest of the page. And I didn't plan this when I put the watercolor down, but the watercolor that I chose for this page is just right with the Copic marker color that I ended up receiving. I love when that happens. Color synchronicities. You can see the little bit of green peeking through in the sewn spine binding part here. Before I started working on this book, I dumped ink down the center, which you can kind of see when I turn it on its edge here, because I wanted to do that. I wanted to have a little bit less of that blank page feeling when I flipped from page to page. So that's a trick you can use, and you don't have to use ink. You could use watercolor. You could use watered down acrylic paint, although your pages might stick together a little bit. So I would stick to something water-based. Alcohol ink would also work if you have like a refill or one of those little squeeze bottles. And then when you turn to the new page, you don't have a completely blank slate to start with. And for some people, that can feel a little bit better.
Hey, Erin, we got a lot of activity in the chat here.
Okay.
Let's see what we got here. Sorry if I waited a little too long. Let's see here. Madeline says, where is she? Sorry, there's a lot going on. When I used the crayons, I had to layer a few times. It was a bit rough feeling, perhaps cold temperatures here in Alaska. Not sure if they're smooth when warmer. I found that brushing over the crayon areas with a stiff, cheap paintbrush afterwards smoothed it out a bit and got rid of any extra little wax clumps that fell off the crayon. So they made it less rough or sticky feeling, if that's what people are going for.
Yep. Yeah. So it's a really good point. You may have seen me brush that away a little bit. It does clump a little bit. It's a little less smooth than a regular crayon that you might be used to, because it doesn't have all the stabilizers in it. This is just straight up wax. And so it's different than drawing with a candle. So it's not like that. It is just kind of a plain wax. And so it will pill up a little bit on the surface. If you're in a colder climate, it might do that a little bit more. If you're in a hotter climate, it might go on a little smoother. If you have a heat gun, you can use that with it. You can use that with crayon also. But also just kind of going back over with it, you can kind of push those little pills back down onto the page and create something a little thicker. Okay, so I want to show something. Got some sharp scissors here. And when you do that, when you make it thick onto the surface, you can actually scratch it away. So now I've got this other interesting texture that I can create using these crayons. Right, the water-based media will not sit on the surface of them, but alcohol marker will. So then you can scratch away and kind of go back to the even whiter white of the page there. If you don't have sharp scissors, you don't have to use that. You could use your fingernail. That works too. If you don't mind getting a little wax under your fingernails, and then you get a little bit of a thicker line. You could also use paper clip that you've undone, or a thumbtack, or you could use a pencil. But what a pencil will do, and I'll show you, a pencil will give you a pencil line, which is also interesting. So then I've got these little funny little bits of blue wax that I've scraped off. And, you know, it is a warm spring day here in Healdsburg, so it's maybe a little softer than those of you that are in the snow right now. But I'm able to kind of blend this back down onto the page. So that's wax mixed with alcohol ink from the Copic marker that's now blended back onto this page. So I'm always thinking when I'm working in my art journal, I'm always thinking about like the richness of texture that I can create. And then why, right? Why a richness of texture? Because a lot of the feelings that we have are maybe not necessarily any one thing only at any given time, right? We're very often feeling multiple things at once. And so being able to have maybe more complex mark making tricks up our sleeves, we can explore some other things. So now to me, this is getting really interesting. We've got these different media working together, the Copic marker, the watercolor, the little fibers, the wax, the tape, pencil. So when I get to about this stage of a page, I start thinking about like what else, right? What else needs to be here? And I think on this page, I'm going to use a little bit of acrylic paint. This is acrylic that I put into a brush bottle, and I'm working onto a wet page because where it touches a very saturated part of the page, it'll bleed a little bit, like you see over there. And you can use acrylic right over the top of the wax. When it dries, you can do that same thing where you can scrape away because the wax layer will move and the acrylic, which is plastic suspended in water, will sit on top, but you will be able to scratch it away a little bit. Really, that's not what I was planning on doing, but I do like the way that looks where you can kind of see it as a brush stroke. So I think I'm gonna do a couple of those. For any of you that are relatively new to art journaling, one of the things that you might notice that's different than maybe doing a painting or doing a drawing or even writing something is the more that you can let yourself do what the materials want to do, meaning like don't plan it out, right? It's generally better to kind of sit down and play with the materials and see what happens, right? Because I wasn't expecting that little bit of water sitting on the surface there. I really like the way that that's happening in that area. I love those like pure brush strokes that are happening over there. And so this is then going to turn into something that maybe has more personal meaning for me than if I sat down and said, I'm going to paint something using blue and it's going to be about sadness. It's generally better to kind of come to your art journal and see what shows up and work on it in that way. All right, so I'm going to set this one aside and let it dry.
Erin, question for you.
Yes.
Dana says, has anyone been able to find the glue bottles with the brushes and the cap? She's had no luck.
Oh, okay. I can I'll post on Mix the links for these because these are, you can see I have quite a few of them over here. And what I do, like I'll put matte medium in them, or like this is medium mixed with some gray. I put colors in it or mixes of colors. It's a great way to use up the end of a tube of paint. And then it's nice because then if I'm in the middle of an art journaling session like I am right now, I don't have to stop and wash my brushes or rinse out my water. And I don't have to worry about ruining brushes because I've let them sit there too long with paint on the brush. So they're really wonderful. It's been a great find. So I'm happy to share that with people. Okay, so coming back to this now, it's dried a little bit. And what I wanted to do, I love what's happening here where it's kind of staying inside that line. I'm going to come back. This is now going over a different wax crayon and watercolor with this wax. It's a little damp, it'd be a little better if I waited a little longer, but I did want to just kind of show this way of coming back in And I'm putting a lot of wax on, and you can see that my lines are staying put, right? This spot here, so it's this way to kind of to preserve some of these more subtle things that happen with water-based media and still be able to go back over with something more bold. You'll see me very often kind of switching the way that I'm holding materials when I'm working in my art journal, both kind of going from more of a traditional way of holding a pen or marker to going to more of an artist way of holding it, right? And that's another way too to explore the voice or the language of the material and work with it in multiple ways because it's going to look different depending on how you hold the tool. So really there's kind of infinite combinations of all these different materials that you get every time because the different way that you hold it, the different temperature, the different things you combine it with, all these things make it look and feel different. You can see that that wax is protecting these very subtle places with the watercolor. This can be really useful if you're working in a journal with like mixed media techniques and you fall in love with something that you've done and you want to make sure that it stays safe. You can use this wax over top of that. And then I would suggest also using it on the other side so that nothing can bleed through from the other side and disrupt some really lovely little passage of mark making that you've done. I'm going to set that one aside. Open up another journal that I'm working in and play a little bit with ephemera. So this is a journal with watercolor paper. This is a very strange piece of ephemera. So this is an ephemera hour right now, but I did want to share like this very strange little piece of paper that I probably shouldn't have. It was inside a package of grapes. And I know because I am streaming to you right now from a vineyard that the way it works is the different people that pick grapes, they have a different number assigned to them and they get paid by the number of bins that they fill up. So this little square getting left in the grapes that I purchased represents a person that picked those grapes. And I wanted to hold on to that and do something with it today. So I'm going to pull out my small ephemera envelope.
Question from Rodney here.
Yeah.
Earth Day is Monday. Are you going to be doing something special in journaling?
Oh, good question. I'm actually tomorrow going to Climate Fest here in Healdsburg with the organization that I work for, and we have two booths. One is about our kitchen garden, and one is the older adults are having their own booth, and I'm sitting at that booth, and we're making buttons. So people are welcome to create buttons with a message that they'd like to share. So that's what I'll be doing. And then I'm sure I'll do something. I mean, there's a lot of nature themes in my work. Many of you know that. So, all right. So I'm not sure if this is a 4 or a 6, but I'm going to choose that it's a 4. And I'm going to choose that it's a 4 because I've got my 4 little college graduates here. And what I want to do is do something with them. So many of you received different, maybe different combinations. You should have all received at least some college graduates in their little caps and gowns. And the thing that was funny to me as I was cutting these out is just the differences in their facial expressions in these grouping of people that are together. Like this guy looks like, I don't know, maybe he's a little bit surprised that he graduated. This guy looks very determined. This guy looks like very maybe proud. I don't know. And this guy looks like he's trying to represent maybe the marble sculpture of himself that will happen. So I wanted to do something with these four, and you know, I also wanted to present some different ways to work with these. If like the people that you received, you're like, I don't have any connection to these humans whatsoever, and I don't know what to do with them. One thing you could do is just completely cover their faces altogether or obscure part of their face so that then they become more of a general every person, and they aren't these particular four. That's also helpful if you're worried at all that maybe they'll see your journal and be like, that's me when I graduated from college. How did you get that? You can blame me, that's fine. Actually, you can blame the person from the estate sale where I picked up the yearbook. Okay, so I'm going to glue these four down. And I'm so curious to hear about who you've received and the stories that you've decided to tell yourself about them. One thought that I had that would be kind of fun is to make them all say something. Let me go back to a very fine little marker and give them each a little speech bubble here. This guy feels like he has a lot to say, so I'm going to give him a big one.
Hey, Erin, we're a little over halfway through.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, so I've got my speech bubbles on there. And then here's another point where the artist crayon might come in handy. If you do want to make sure that at least some of their face stays, but you want to kind of go in and add more media, this can go over the top of this. And you see how, maybe I'll show you with one of them. I'll take a crayon and show you what happens. But this doesn't obscure the face. I'll do it with this goofy guy. Whereas if I go in with the white crayon, see how he's kind of, the features have kind of disappeared. Now he looks a little bit scary. Sorry, buddy. So again, it's this really great tool when you're working with ephemera that you want to make sure you preserve. You can kind of burnish it a little bit with your finger too. Bit of this over the top of that so that the rest of it stays. Okay, so I'm gonna put a bit of more ink on here. I have it. I'm gonna start with the layer marker and go right up to the edge of my speech bubbles. The other thing I really like about these brush markers is it's a nice, generous brush. So you can get a pretty fine line and then you can turn it on its side and get a pretty thick line. I'm always looking for tools where, again, I have that kind of diversity of mark making options. Yeah. What I'm doing now is just getting a little bit of this onto the paper so that then I can come in with brush and move it around a little bit. I just noticed myself wanting to do it, so I'm going to say this to you. I am keeping my journal in this position so that you can see it, but for yourself, rotate the journal to bring it to you, right? Make it comfortable for yourself to get to the place that you want to make marks. Again, you're enabling yourself to make the marks that feel most authentic. The best thing you can do for yourself when you're art journaling is kind of set yourself up to feel as free to express as possible. Meaning that you've got your supplies in reach, they're ready, you have everything that you need, so that you're not having to do a lot of starting and stopping when you're in the middle of trying to express something. This is especially true if you're maybe trying to do something that's about something difficult, or just trying to express big feelings in some way. Actually, I didn't say that I was doing this before I did it, but I switched to adding a little bit of ink onto my brush as well. So you can see that the wax is doing a really nice job of preserving my little dudes here. Maybe I ought to give them names. I'll do that later. Look how interesting it is where it hits this paper. I have no idea what that paper is. It's very thin paper that came from inside the grapes. So not a lot of different materials on this page, and yet it looks really like something is happening here, right? It's starting to come together. Those of you that have been around before know that these are kind of my thinking marks that I'm making right now. Wanting to still stay on this page, but not sure what I'm going to do next, so I'll make some little marks to just kind of visually think. Really love what's happening there. I'm going to not touch that anymore because I like what's happening over in that area. Okay, I'm going to set that aside, sorry. Oh. Sorry, everyone, I'm getting a phone call. People.
A phone call?
Yeah. How dare someone interrupt?
It's okay.
Sorry about that.
How's that? Good?
Good. Okay.
All right. Cool.
All right. Sorry about that. Okay, well, that gave this a little bit longer to dry. Sorry for the interruption. So the other benefit to staying with a page while it's in the process of drying is that you can kind of keep adding. And so you're adding different layers, even though I'm using the same materials over the top of each other. You see that the marks are different. Right? I'm gonna let my four little guys dry out a little bit there. Keep that on the side. I wanted to see, there's another little piece of ephemera I wanted to say that. Okay, so I wanted to do a little bit on the cover. So this is my spring ArtJournalSnacks journal. And there it is. That's what I was looking for. Okay. So our adhesive this time, wanted to make sure I talked about our adhesive today. So we have tacky glue in an easy to journal with form, which is really, really great. So I wanted to show why we included that, because we have this transparency copies that I made you all with these different beautiful vintage birds. So you should also let us know in the chat which bird you got, because there were some different options, different birds. And I got a common blackbird, which was a good one for me. Lots of good songs about blackbirds in the world. So I glued this on, and then I was going to find a way to put my little blackbird on here. And you can see that the transparency, when it goes over something dark, it kind of disappears a little bit. So one way that you can deal with that is you can put, I'm going to put a little bit of, this is acrylic paint mixed with matte medium, and I'm just going to brush a little bit of this onto the part that I know is going to get covered. Oh my gosh, I have a new neighbor and their little tiny dog is a tripod and it just walked by my window. I haven't met it yet, I've only seen it. I think he's going to go drink out of my bird bath. Kind of gross water. I hope he's okay. All right. So what's so great about this is it's just such an easy way to get glue onto a surface. So with the transparencies, you probably don't want to go all the way to the edge, because you'll put it down and then kind of wiggle it. It will dry clear. And since I put that acrylic back behind there, I will still be able to see my little blackbird feet. And a little bit will come across the edge, and that's fine. You can brush it back with your fingers. If you're squeamish about that, of course, you can wipe it away with something else. But as you can see, I don't mind getting materials on my fingers. Plus, you'll end up, I mean, unless you're a felon, maybe don't do this if you're a felon, but you'll end up with some interesting fingerprints into your work. All right, my cat back on there, and that will dry clear. I'll just keep pushing a little bit of it out to the sides there. And so now I have kind of a good start to my cover. The other thing I will want to add is a little bit of the tape from the box that I always save. And this can also go on with tacky glue, so I'll show another way to use this, which is just to kind of as a stand-in for another media. And you can do this with a brush if you're not like me and use your fingers for everything, so you can absolutely brush this around. So now I've got a nice sticky place. And so why this tacky glue instead of maybe another form of glue is this one's, it's first of all, it's really sticky. It dries a little bit faster. And a little bit more viscous, so it doesn't run as much. I find it's a little less wrinkle inducing. And you can see it's going to hold this page down really nicely. Which sometimes with some media, like sometimes I'll stick this on with a glue stick, and it, as much as I love glue sticks, you all know I love glue sticks, but this does a little better. Nothing is wasted. This is usually when I get a phone call, when I've got sticky stuff on my fingers. Other thing that I keep around when I'm art journaling are just some little unscented water wipes. Then I can wipe my fingers off and keep going. So while that glue dries, I wanted to have us have a little bit of time for questions and sharing, and then we'll go back to the camera here and I'll show a couple other pages that I've been working on and things that I'm excited to try out. I wanted to make sure there were times for questions if people had them, and an opportunity to share what you've been working on. So I've been excited to see that lots of people have gotten into their journals and started working on them.
All right, let's see. Anyone wants to share? You can raise your actual hand or your digital hand, whatever you feel comfortable with. On Zoom, let's see. And if no one wants to share, that's also okay. I think people are working, Erin.
Okay, great. We'll go back. Get some more wax paper. Okay. So since you all are working on birds, the little bird guys that you got, I want to show this page. This was a page I did while I was teaching just recently. I taught a puppets and dolls class, which was super fun. And this was a little paper doll that I made of a little red bird, and included some fabric. And what I wanted to show with this is a technique that I really like to use with different ephemera and things that I'm gluing into my journal, which is to have it go from one page to the next. So for this, I made this little bird that is able to flap its wings. And then I added this fabric, and then I wrapped, instead of cutting the fabric off at the edge, I wrapped it around so that it would go on to this next page and then become the inspiration on this next page. Now this next page has some interesting media on it. It's got, again, the wax crayon, both this one, the artist crayon, as well as a regular wax crayon, the brown. And then it's got some tissue paper that's a little bit of a teaser for something we're going to do in the future with ArtJournalSnacks. And then it's got fabric, and then it's also got the resist of the glue. So you can see here that where the glue goes on, the glue actually creates a little bit of a resist as well. So you'll hear me say this over and over as we go through this quarter's journal, that this idea of resist and what it protects and what it shows is a theme that we'll be playing with. You can also see that in this journal, this is where that green ink is coming through. I loved the little stripes that it made on this page. So I wanted to play with this page a little bit more with the wax, just to kind of show how it can go over top of fabric a little bit. And this fabric was stuck on with just a white glue while I was teaching. And now I'm going over it with the wax. Again, it's like this almost encaustic-like technique of blending the wax then into the surface of the paper. And blending then the fabric onto the paper as well. And then also protecting, like, I really love this piece of tissue paper, and I want to make sure if I go over this page with anything else, that this beautiful pattern on this tissue paper doesn't go anywhere. I don't want it to get obscured. I'm putting this on pretty thickly because I'm going to go back and scratch it off in some spots like I was showing before. So I want to make sure I've got a good thick layer of wax to scratch away. The other thing you can do as you get down to the end of your wax is to use the side of it. Good for covering a big surface area. Okay. More kind of reddish brown ink. You can see how it just really preserves that really bright watercolor that was on this page already. And then I'm going to use a little acrylic on this as well, so you can see the scratching the acrylic away. So my heartbreaker pigment, the pigment they no longer are making, which I've collected in as many forms as I possibly can. You can wait for it to dry to scratch it away, or you can start scratching sooner. Now I can get back to that yellow that's underneath. It also gives kind of an interesting area for pigment to settle into. Despite all the brushes, I always end up painting with my fingers. All right, so another thing that you can do is kind of think about what else you might add onto this. So this has this kind of interesting drawn on stripe, and I have this little piece of striped ephemera. And when you're thinking about patterns, kind of think about either going with, right? If I put it down in this direction, then I'm kind of going with these vertical lines that I already have. There's a little bit of horizontality in it with these lines here and the little lines of ink that are coming across there. But they have a different feeling to it, right? So if I put this here, kind of offsetting this other piece of tissue paper, if I put it here, it almost has a, like it stands out. Whereas if I put it here, it feels a little bit more like it's going with the flow of the page. And one is not better than the other. It's just really about the feeling that you have when you look at it. And to me, I wanted this idea of it kind of standing tall, going with the rest of this page. I also like the kind of the visual break that that provides. The rest of the page feels a little bit chaotic and busy, and now there's a little bit of a visual break in the lines of that. And it's got that. All right, so this is drying pretty well. And I want to go back in with a little bit more wax now. Just to hold the edge of my speech bubbles. So you'll find that this wax acts differently on different paper. Right now I'm putting it onto watercolor paper in this journal. And with any materials that are new to you, it's a good idea to just try it out with as many different things as possible, right? As many different combinations. Because you'll find like, oh, I really like what it does when I work on a toothed paper like that. Or actually, I really like how this works on smooth paper, like, or on magazine paper. What are all the different ways that I might use this? And as I'm looking at this page, I was fully intending on giving them each a voice and letting them say something, but I kind of like how it's looking without any words at all. And just the idea of these different sized text boxes being what the page is about. I'm gonna set that aside because I realize I need to go back and get the while I'm making art face. So while I'm making art, I'm gonna stay with my Copic marker for this just to keep them all the same, but it's a big, big smile, and usually this kind of feeling, like my mind can go in so many different directions. So while I'm making art, I feel open. How this is drying. It's drying pretty well. So you can see here, like here where it's just glued on, and then it got very wet and it's peeling up a little bit. Whereas here, the wax over the top has really sealed it to the page. So now I can come in with more wax again and really help this sit on the page and stay put. Funny to me that I'm like scrubbing away at the due date part. I've had difficult relationships with due dates lately. I'm kind of breaking my one material three ways rule here, but I've got a little bit left of this ink and I wanted to use it. And I really like the way it combines with the black. I guess it's a good idea to break my own rules if that's what I'm asking you all to do, right? Okay. So here's another page that I pre-prepared. And this is watercolor, and I'm brushing salt off of the page right now. I'm going to use a brush to get the rest of it off. So really, really let the salt bloom on this. I did the watercolor and then really let it sit there for overnight. So it really got a really nice bloom on it. And I thought it might be, although I have to cover a little bit of it up, this was another thing that I got in my ephemera. And I thought the colors of this really blended nicely. But I feel a little bit ambivalent, I guess, about covering some of this beautiful watercolor technique. So one thing that you can do is, just let go of the preciousness of different materials like this and cut away a little bit. So, okay, that feels a little better. I've got more of the watercolor showing. And then this white part here just seems not necessary, right? I can cut here and cut away some of this white and still have the feeling of this building. Now there's two little dogs walking around outside my house. All right, so that feels better to me, that I've not totally obliterated this beautiful watercolor. I love the way this color looks with the brick here. So I'm going to go ahead and glue that guy down. And it's always, if it's too big for the page, there's always that decision of, do I like more of the sky or do I want more of the building? And I think what I'm going to do is have the building and then wrap the sky around to the next page. Because I really like those lines there. So I'll just take this, and while the glue is still wet, wrap it around, and then I have the beginning of the next page. And actually I can take this little piece that I cut off and put it over here. Cool. All right, so that page is starting to come together. I don't know what else I'll put here. I have this paper that I received that's kind of exactly in the right color family. So it might be interesting to put something on here. Maybe it's open so that, again, nothing gets covered. So I could stick it on here. I have a little bit of washi tape I could put it on with. I'm going to cover any more of the watercolor. So let's put a little bit of that on there and then cool. All right, so that'll become something interesting. You know what, yeah. But I do like the way all these colors are working together. But something interesting can happen there. All right.
Do we want to see if anyone wants to share?
That would be great. Good point for that.
All right, let's see here. If you want to share what you created, oh, there we go. Sherry raised her digital hand. You can raise your digital hand or your physical hand, but let's go to Sherry first. So let me bring you on screen. All right, take it away.
Hey, so these are the 4 that I got. I was happy to see a woman on there. That was fun. So I have to create stories for them. And I also got this guy.
I remember cutting him out.
Be a blast. So this is what I've been working on. I cut some colorful bits out of an art catalog. So I added those on. This is my one material 3 ways. I haven't put the numbers on yet, but or the faces. I was wondering though, it's kind of busy and I think it needs something to pull it together. Do you have any suggestions?
I wonder about, so you have like the scribbles with the wax crayon, and then there's the line work of the ArtJournalSnacks pretzel. I wonder about taking like either a thin white pen or probably or a very thin brush with some white acrylic and just do kind of a white line that kind of goes from one side of the page across different things and over to the other side. Maybe do that a few times so
Okay.
that it pulls it, yeah, like kind of says that this is all one page, right? This is one thing. That might be one thing to do. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Great. Let's go to Cynthia. Let's see here. No, I. Start your video.
Okay. Hello,
Hi.
here's the clutter. I had to show because I got my favorite piece of ephemera that I have ever gotten in here. I love this harp player
Oh, yeah.
so much. I just so she is obviously she is my focal, and I did not want to cut her. I was going to put her on my cover, but she was too big and I didn't want to cut her, so she gets a full page. And then she's got all the little guy heads are obviously subservient to her. She's awesome. I love her fancy little shoe.
Yeah.
She's so focused. I just love her.
Yeah, and the shadow too, right? Like that was such
Yeah.
a
Oh yeah. It is. I love this picture so much.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Excellent. I'm glad she wound up in the right person's ephemera envelope. Thank you for sharing that.
and then also here is my hoopoe
Uh-huh.
or whatever. I don't know. I love birds and I love vintage birds. I had not encountered a hoopoe before, so if anyone's wondering, you can see it. That's he's probably going on my cover too.
Wonderful.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you for sharing that. All right.
Anyone else? Let's take a look. Is anyone raising their actual hand? Let's see. I don't think so. Just fine. We have about 6 or so minutes left. Erin, do you want to go back to your
Yeah, because I can kind of show something that I was just talking about, which is here we go. So what I was just talking about with using line to kind of pull the pages together, this is kind of that idea of having a line travel from one side of the page in front of and behind the other elements so that it moves your eye around the page, but also says this is one page, right? A couple examples of doing that, sort of moving from something that's more wild to something that is a little bit more contained. Then I wanted to show something. So the other day we set up a still life at work, and some of you who have been in art classes before may recognize what we use. They are those plaster forms that I have one that's a mouth, a nose, an ear, and an eye. And we set them up in the middle of the table, and this was one of my attempts. So I was drawing the mouth form, and then I made it have a speech bubble. And I've used a little bit of wax crayon here to write some things, and then a little bit of ink. The wax creating a wonderful resist down here. And then I wanted a second chance at it. So here's another version of that. This is using pencil and then the Lyra brush pens here to get this dark black. And I love the idea of like something that's a very black ink against lighter pencil lines. So there's the nose and the mouth in there. But this I thought was a good example for something to think about doing where you're just really writing, right? Just let yourself write and then let that writing integrate itself into the rest of the page that you're doing. So don't be afraid to use writing in your pages. I think there's another thing I wanted to share from in here. I think we'll just check back in with this page, which if you remember, this is the one that has the wax over the tape, and then it's also got some acrylic paint on it. The acrylic paint has now dried, and I wanted to go in just for a last little bit with a little bit of the metallic pens that we received, because don't overlook the power of just a little bit of something shiny. And these are so shiny. They're like, sparks is the right word in here, because they really almost look like they're lit from inside. I have a lot of different types of gold and metallic media that I play with, but these are next level. So just adding a little bit of that in sometimes can be a fun way to change the overall feeling of a page. I'm not sure if it goes with the text that's on this page, out of sight, out of mind, but maybe it's then about the little sparkles that we don't always see, but they might be out of sight and out of mind, but they're still there, shining.
Melon says these gel pens are so smooth.
They are, yeah. And also they've got that nice grip on them, so they feel really nice to write with. Okay, go back to my first page here. I wanted to take a moment to do how I feel after making art. And I think I am gonna switch to this, because I also want to show like how this is, commercially printed black ink, and it, even though it feels a little bit translucent, it does cover over that black pretty well. So after making art, I feel sparkly. Is that on the emotion list? I don't know, but that's how I feel. Maybe a little bit of awe. So curious, open, and awe. That's a pretty good progression for a day to go from one feeling to another. And, that's, I think, another good point to make here at the close of our live stream today is that you might not always feel better when you art journal, but you will learn something. And my hope is that it is able to take you from one place to another in the process of getting to somewhere that feels good. Right? So don't want you to feel like it's always going to work, that I'll open up my art journal and I'll always feel better. Sometimes that progression will bring up stuff, and that's normal. Just keep journaling. That's my big recommendation to you, is to keep journaling, keep making art, and keep making messes too. Let me put this last little bit of tape in here, and then send you on your way. I hope that you all share what you make on Mix and on Instagram. Please let us know when you do. Tag us on Instagram and share on Mix. Ask your questions on Mix. I'm so happy to talk through ideas and materials with you, and I hope that you have a wonderful first little bit of play with this box.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us live. I'm going to stop the recording now.